Before we board this final journey into the frozen unknown, I invite you to take a seat and settle in. If you enjoy these long form immersions, please subscribe and leave a comment telling us what kind of atmosphere you'd like to explore next. Every like helps us keep the steam rising in this engine of stories. Now, let us depart. The Silver Summit Station was never listed on any map. It was perched 10,000 feet up, where the air is so thin it tastes like needles and the snow never truly melts. I arrived there in the winter of 1952, not as a passenger, but as an investigator. My uncle Victor Vance had been the lead engineer for the Trans-Boreal line. He was a genius of steel, a man who could calculate the stress on a rivet just by touching it. But 10 years ago, we had vanished along with the Midnight Express, a train carrying 300 souls and a cargo that was classified as non physical. The station was empty except for a single lantern swinging in the wind and the sound of a telegraph machine that was clicking even though the wires had been cut decades ago. I found Victor's journals in the station master's office. They were bound in cold blue leather. As I opened the first page, a small brass whistle fell out. It was engraved with a symbol I didn't recognize, a wheel with wings made of smoke. September 12th, 1941, the journal read. The government wants a train that moves faster than light. They don't understand. Speed isn't about engines, it's about the geometry of the soul. If I can build a track that follows the curve of a memory, we won't need coal. We will move on the momentum of what was lost. As I read, the floor began to vibrate. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a rhythmic, heavy thumping, the sound of a massive piston moving deep underground. I followed the sound to a hidden hangar behind the station. There, sitting on tracks made of a strange translucent alloy, was the Midnight Express. It didn't look like a train. It looked like a cathedral made of black iron and silver glass. The engine was breathing. Cold steam hissed from its valves, smelling of ozone and old photographs. I stepped onto the footplate, and the brass key I had inherited from my uncle began to glow. "You're late for the 12:05, Leo," a voice said. I turned. It was a shadow, or at least a man made of charcoal smoke. He was wearing a conductor's uniform, but his eyes were the color of the northern lights. "I'm here for Victor," I said, my breath hitching in the cold. "Victor isn't here," the shadow replied. "Victor is the train." Without a sound, the doors of the carriages slid open. I walked through them. Each carriage was a different room from a different life. One looked like a nursery from the 1800s. Another looked like a library with books that were writing themselves. The 300 passengers weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. They were echoes. They were the moments people had forgotten. The first kiss, the last goodbye, the secret never told. Victor had built a train to collect the parts of ourselves we leave behind. "The track doesn't go to the next city," the conductor whispered as the train began to move. "It goes to the great someday, but the government wants to use the engine as a weapon. They want to reach the past to change the wars. We have to keep the train moving, Leo. If it stops, history will unravel like a frayed sweater." Suddenly, a siren echoed through the mountains. Below us in the valley, I saw the lights of a military convoy. They had found the Silver Summit. They were bringing heavy artillery to stop the Midnight Express. They didn't want the memories. They wanted the technology of the winged wheel. "Take the whistle, Leo," the shadow conductor said, handing me the brass whistle I had found. "You are the new architect. You have to play the song of the tracks. If the frequency is right, we will leave this world behind entirely." As the Midnight Express pulled away from the Silver Summit, the laws of space began to stretch and warp. The exterior of the train looked like 12 standard carriages, but inside, the hallways seemed to extend for miles. I walked past doors made of mahogany, frosted glass, and even rough-hewn pine. "Every door is a year," the shadow conductor whispered, his form flickering like a dying candle. "And every passenger is a version of someone who exists somewhere else. We don't carry people, Leo. We carry the versions of them that the world wasn't ready to keep." I opened a door marked 1928. Inside, the carriage had been transformed into a sun-drenched meadow. A young woman was sitting on a picnic blanket, frozen in a moment of laughter. The air smelled of clover and honey, even though we were hurtling through a blizzard at 10,000 feet. She wasn't a ghost, she was a permanent present. I moved toward the front of the train, toward the heat. The engine room wasn't filled with coal and fire. Instead, the massive boiler was a sphere of translucent crystal. Inside, thousands of small glowing orbs swirled in a violent vortex. "What are those?" I asked, shielding my eyes. "Regrets," the conductor replied. "Nothing burns hotter than a regret. The steam that moves these pistons isn't water, it's the collective, if only, of the human race." Victor discovered that the energy released when a heart breaks is enough to power a locomotive across the stars. I saw my uncle's desk bolted to the floor right next to the crystal furnace. On it sat a half finished blueprint for a bridge made of light. Beside the blueprint was a photograph of my mother and me when I was a child. It was the only object in the room that wasn't made of steel or shadow. I sat at Victor's desk and opened the heavy iron logbook. The pages were made of thin sheets of lead to protect the writing from the engine's radiation. October 14th, 1944, the entry began. The military believes this train is about transportation. They want to move troops behind enemy lines before the enemy is even born. They call it tactical temporal displacement. I call it murder. I have redesigned the tracks. We are no longer heading for the capital. We are heading for the great someday, a place where time is a circle, not a cage. I have to become the engine to save the passengers. I will. The fire is hungry, but my resolve is colder than the frost. I realized then that Victor hadn't vanished by accident. He had staged a heist. He had stolen 300 souls from the clutches of a government that wanted to weaponize their memories. As the train accelerated, the thump thump of the pistons began to sync with my own heartbeat. I felt a strange vibration in the soles of my boots. A voice, deep and metallic, vibrated through the floorboards. "Leo, can you hear the rhythm?" It was Victor. His consciousness had merged with the locomotive. He was the pressure in the pipes. He was the grease on the gears. He had traded his flesh for iron to protect the cargo. "Uncle Victor," I shouted into the roaring heat of the engine. "The military is close, Leo. They have a static engine, a machine designed to freeze the tracks. If they hit us with the beam, the train will become a tomb. You must find the whistle. You must play the frequency of departure." I looked out the window. Far below, on the winding mountain roads, I saw them. Black armored trucks with massive satellite dishes mounted on top. They weren't firing shells. They were firing pulses of blue light that turned the snow into jagged glass. The tracks ahead began to glow, a sickly neon blue. The Midnight Express groaned, its speed dropping. The echoes in the carriages began to flicker. The sun-drenched meadow in the 1928 carriage started to turn gray, the laughter of the woman replaced by a static hiss. "They're pinning us down," the conductor cried, his form thinning. "The history is starting to leak. If we stop here, the memories will spill into the valley and drown everyone in a century of grief." I grabbed brass whistle. It was cold, so cold it felt like it was burning my palm. I climbed out onto the exterior of the speeding engine, the wind trying to tear me from the handrails. Standing on the outer ledge of the locomotive, the wind felt like a physical wall trying to push me into the abyss. Below, the blue pulses from the military's static engines were hitting the tracks with increasing frequency. Every time a pulse struck, the Midnight Express shuddered, and the sound of the pistons turned into a dying gasp. I held the brass whistle to my lips. My uncle's voice resonated through the metal beneath my feet. "Don't play what you hear, Leo. Play what you miss." I thought of the day Victor laughed, the smell of his old tobacco pipe, the way he promised that science is just magic with a deadline. I blew into the whistle. The first note was thin and reedy, but as I poured my grief into the brass, it transformed. It became a pure, vibrating frequency that resonated with the very atoms of the train. The blue static around the wheels began to shatter like glass. The train surged forward, its engine letting out a roar that wasn't mechanical, but triumphant. We weren't just moving on tracks anymore. We were moving on a wave of sound. But the military was persistent. Using magnetized grappling hooks, a team of specialized temporal soldiers managed to board the rear carriage. They weren't armed with bullets. They carried vacuum grenades, devices designed to suck the memory echoes out of the rooms and collapse the train's internal dimensions. I fought my way back through the carriages. It was like walking through a fever dream. In Carriage 7, I saw soldiers trying to arrest a group of echoes from a 1920s masquerade ball. They aren't real. A soldier screamed, throwing a grenade. The room began to fold in on itself, the gold leaf peeling off the walls like bird skin. I blew a sharp staccato note on the whistle. The music of the masquerade ball suddenly amplified. The violins of 1925 became a physical force, pushing the soldiers back against the doors. The echoes weren't just ghosts anymore. They were becoming solid, protected by the frequency I was playing. In the middle of the fight, the shadow conductor appeared beside me. He didn't use a weapon. He simply touched the soldiers, and they froze, their faces reflecting scenes from their own childhoods. "Why are you helping me?" I panted, leaning against a door marked 1934. The conductor reached up and pulled back his shadow hood. I gasped. It wasn't my uncle's face. It was my face, but younger, 10 years old, the age I was when Victor disappeared. "I am the part of you that believed he would come back," the boy conductor said. "Victor didn't just steal the passengers, Leo. He stole the hope of the people who love them to use as a compass. I am your hope, materialized in iron. If I die, you lose the ability to believe in anything." We reached the end of the physical world. Ahead, the tracks simply stopped at the edge of the Obsidian Gorge, a 3-mile drop into a sea of frozen fog. The military convoy was lined up at the edge, their static cannons humming, ready to catch us the moment we fell. "Whistle the bridge, Leo." Victor's voice boomed from the engine's boiler. "The bridge isn't made of stone. It's made of the connection between where we were and where we must go. Bridge the gap." I stepped onto the very tip of the cowcatcher, staring into the empty air. I didn't think of the soldiers. I didn't think of the government. I thought of the 300 souls behind me, the mothers, the poets, the children who were nothing more than unwanted data to the men with the cannons. I blew the longest, most difficult note. It was the note of departure. As the note left the whistle, the air in front of the train began to crystallize. Thousands of shimmering, translucent slats appeared in the void. They looked like glass, but they glowed with the amber warmth of the engine's heart. The Midnight Express hit the glass bridge at 100 miles per hour. The sound was like 1,000 crystal chandeliers shattering at once. The military opened fire, but their pulses simply passed through us. We were no longer on their frequency. We were a ghost story in motion. Looking back, I saw the Obsidian Gorge vanish into the mist. The soldiers, the trucks, and the frozen summit became small, then faded into a dull gray smudge. We were climbing higher than any mountain, ascending into a sky where the stars looked like silver rivets in the dome of the universe. The boy conductor stood beside me, his form finally becoming solid. He smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, the hole in my chest felt like it was being filled with light. When the train finally stopped, the sound of the brakes wasn't a grinding of metal. It was like a long, relieved sigh. We had arrived at the infinite terminal. It was a place where the sky was always the color of twilight, a deep purple streaked with gold. There were no concrete platforms here. They were woven of light and mist. I stepped out of the driver's cab, still clutching my whistle. Hundreds of other trains stood around us, from ancient steam locomotives to futuristic silver arrows. All of them were empty. "This is the place where everything that has nowhere to go stops," a voice said. A figure stepped out of the light. It wasn't my uncle, but a woman in a white railroad uniform. Her eyes were like clockwork, constantly turning. She was the great architect, Victor Vance has done the impossible, she said, touching the black metal of her train with her hand. He has snatched 300 souls from the loop of suffering, but the train cannot run forever without fuel. Its heart, its own will, is running out. She led me to the cauldron. The crystal sphere inside no longer burned brightly. The memory fires within moved slowly, as if falling asleep. If the cauldron goes out, these people will simply disappear. They will not go to heaven or hell. They will become nothing, an emptiness. What is the price? I asked, already knowing the answer. Someone must become the new fire. Someone must give up their own future days so that these people can have their eternal now. I stepped inside the cauldron. It didn't hurt. There, in the very center of the whirlwind of memories, sat Victor. He looked like a man made of pure amber light. He held the blueprints of my childhood in his hands. Leo, he smiled. You built a bridge. I knew you could, but you shouldn't stay here. You have a place to go back to. You have a tomorrow that they don't have. I can't let them disappear, Uncle. They are all you saved. Victor shook his head. We don't save people by keeping them in a jar. We save them by putting them back into the world. A real railroad isn't a circle, it's a line that leads somewhere. I remember how the whistle worked. It wasn't just music, it was a frequency, a communication frequency. I didn't go into the boiler. Instead, I climbed onto the roof of the train and played the last note. It was a note I had never heard before, the note of return. I imagined not the station, but the dreams of people in the real world. I imagined the grandchildren of those who disappeared in 1941. I imagined artists, writers, and ordinary people who lacked inspiration. With each second of the whistle, the train cars began to evaporate. But it wasn't destruction. The passengers, 300 moons, began to turn into golden birds. They weren't flying into the sky, they were flying through space, returning to the world of people. They became those sudden memories that make us smile in the middle of a hard day. They became a life saving inspiration. When the last bird flew away, the station was gone. The train crumbled into rusty pieces, and I felt myself falling. I woke up at Silver Summit Station. It was morning. The sun was blinding my eyes, reflecting off the fresh snow. There were no soldiers, no black trucks, only silence. I looked down at my hands. The whistle was still there, but it had become an ordinary piece of old brass. Victor's diary lay next to it. I opened the last page. It was written in my own handwriting, although I had not written it. Thank you for completing the track. The train arrived on schedule. I walked down the mountains. Every time I heard the horn of a real train somewhere in the valley, I smiled. I knew that somewhere in the carriages, among the ordinary passengers, my passengers were also traveling, invisible but finally free. Thank you for traveling with us on the Midnight Express. This story has reached its final station. If you have felt the cold of iron and the warmth of memories, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with the word architect. Remember, what we lose is never gone forever. It is simply waiting for its train until the next journey into the unknown.